Hi everybody, welcome to this session. My name is Toby Olivier and we're going to take a look at a repetition structure in C known as the while loop. Alright, so on the screen here you can see an example program of a while loop, or at least implementing a while loop. And let's take a closer look at the code that you can see on the screen. So, like always, we have a main function. We made it as simple as possible, not to distract with anything other than what we really want to show. And the code has been pre-created, so this is just a review session, just so that you can hopefully catch any gaps that you have in your understanding of the while loop. Alright, so I have first and foremost up here in my code, I have three integer variables. Counter variable initialized to 1, an input variable initialized to 0, a sum variable initialized also to 0. And I'll be making use of these variables down in the code, and I'll explain them when we get there. So first and foremost, we print counter control out on the screen. Then we run this while loop, which will effectively run 10 times, and every time it runs, it will print out iteration with a number which is equal to the counter variable value, and I'll describe that soon. So basically we want on the screen to say to see iteration 1, iteration 2, iteration 3. So every time the loop runs, it's one more iteration, and it should print out what is that iteration that it's running in now. And then after we've done with that loop, that's an example of a counter controlled loop, we're gonna print out Sentinel control on the screen, because this while loop has been implemented using Sentinel control. And basically it will print out sum is equal to a value, and then it will ask the user to enter a value. It will capture and store this value and add it to sum, and then it will print out the same line again. This time you'll see sum will be updated. Just for a runtime example, let's quickly run it. So you can see here on the screen it says counter control iteration 1 and all the way through to iteration 10. That means this counter control loop up here ran 10 times. Okay, and we call that iterations. Then on the screen we have Sentinel control, and it says sum is 0, enter a value. So let me type in this value of 10. When I hit enter, it says sum is 10, enter a value, let's say 2. Now sum is 12, enter a value, 6. Now sum is 18, enter a value. So you can see it keeps on adding the value that we've typed to the sum. If I type a negative value, let's say minus 8, let's see what happens. Now sum decreased to 10. So that minus 8 was added to sum, but because it's a negative value, it actually decreased sum. And we'll see that when we look at our code, why that happened. The other thing is it's not shown on the output screen here, but if you look at the code here and you look at this condition, it says while input is not equals to -1. So that -1 is actually our Sentinel value, and that will effectively stop the loop from running. Otherwise, this will keep on happening. It will keep on asking enter a new value and displaying the sum. That's what's happening in this loop until we provide the Sentinel value -1. You can see the moment I entered -1, my program is done, and that's the end of it. Alright, so let's get back to the code. I'm going to start from the top here. So first and foremost, in our subject we illustrate to you, or we demonstrate to you two ways to implement a loop and to control that loop specifically. You can control it using a counter variable, or you can control it using a Sentinel value. So pretty much when you control it using a counter variable, most of the times it's kind of like a fixed run loop. You know how many times it should run. So you set up the loop's condition, the incrementation of the counter variable, and whatever other code you want in the loop. You set it up so that loop specifically will run a specific amount of times. So let's take a look at this one. It says while counter less than or equal to 10. So this is the condition. For as long as this condition is true, the loop will keep on running. And if I scroll up to line 9, you'll see we declared counter and we immediately initialized it to 1. This is a very important step to initialize it, because if you don't initialize a variable, there's an unknown value in it, and we typically refer to that as a garbage value. But the problem is you don't know what the value is, and it can be anything. So when we get down to line 15, which happens after line 9, of course, counter here is red. It's evaluated to see is counter less than or equal to 10. The first time we get to this loop, we don't know what the value of counter is if we did not initialize it. So therefore, if there's a garbage value, so if you did not initialize it like that, then you risk this while loop not ever running, because we don't know what the garbage value will be, and if it's something more than 10, the loop won't even run the first time. So you got to make sure that your variable, especially a counter variable, typically we want to start it off at 0, not always, but typically. So we make sure counter is 0. So the first time this loop is reached, counter is 0. 0 is less than 10. So that will be true. Then it will print out this line, the printf will execute. So it will print out counter. Sorry, it was 1, not 0. Okay, so in this case, I wanted counter to initialize to 1. For the simple reason that when it prints out here in the loop iteration, I don't want to say iteration 0. I want to say iteration 1. So that's why I initialized counter to 1 there. And here we're simply reading what counter is. That's also why to say or equals to 10. So there is an alternative way. If I wanted to start counter off to 0 as such, and I just say counter less than 10, it will run 10 times. However, if I still wanted to start off printing from 1, then I just have to shift up this value. I have to say counter plus 1. This will not change the value of counter. It will change the value that printf will display to the screen. All right, a very important difference. So let me just undo all of that. Okay, so we have our code the way it was, and then I have to increment counter. So every time the loop runs, counter will be incremented by 1, so that it starts off at 1 and it gets consistently incremented by 1 until the last time it will be incremented to 11 after it printed 10, and the while loop is done. Okay, and that's counter control, because that variable, the variable is in the condition and we are incrementing the variable inside the loop. The combination of those two things, with the counter variable being the center stage, that is what controls how many times that loop will run. Okay, now we get to Sentinel control. So Sentinel control is implemented differently, of course. And the idea here is that you as the programmer do not know how many times this loop should run. However, you want to give that control over to the user. So you will typically tell the user to enter a value. Here we could have said enter a value and just give a hint -1 to stop. Okay, that just makes it extra user friendly. So we tell the user, excuse me, we tell the user enter a value, and that happens inside the loop. So the user will keep on entering a value and the loop will keep on running, because the value that the user enters goes to the input variable here in the scanf. And we use that same variable up here in our condition for the while to check if it's not a single value. Here there's a range of values that we actually checked. If you look at the condition statement, if you look at this conditional statement, you'll see we're just checking to see that it's not a specific value, which is -1. So that's why we tell the user type -1 to stop. That means it's not a legitimate input. It's not really a legitimate input. It is, but it's not a value input. It's a command input, if you will. So when the user types that in and we capture and store it to input, the while loop will come back, and here we'll find that it's -1, so that makes that statement false, and the loop will stop running. So that means this loop will run as long as the user did not type -1. So we as programmers do not know how many times that will be. We simply know it will keep on running until the user basically types -1, which is the flag or the sentinel value. All right. Also very important, just see that I actually added input to sum, and then I'm only capturing sum. So I specifically did that for one reason, and that is that if the user types in -1, it will not get added to sum. So it will not affect the value of sum. And how does it do that? Well, it first adds input to sum. Now that's also why input has been initialized to 0. Okay, because the first time my program runs, I don't want sum to be anything other than 0. And you can see sum was also initialized to 0, input and sum. So the first time the loop runs, it will be 0 plus 0 goes into sum. Then the user can enter a value. The user enters a first value, let's say 10. The loop runs again, then it's 0 plus 10 is 10. 10 gets stored to sum. Let's say the user is done and types -1. -1 is stored into input at this point. Okay. But then the loop is at the end, it returns back to the header where the condition is, and now it finds that it's -1, so it stops running. Meaning that -1 never had the chance to get added to sum, which would have been the next thing. But because we restructured it like this, it never got added to sum. Alright, if I had done this, if I had put it below the scanf, then the time that the user enters -1 will be stored input, and then -1 will be added to sum, thereby changing the sum value, which it should not have. And only then after that does it pick up, okay, it's actually -1, stop the loop from running. Okay, so that will affect the value of sum. It will basically make it incorrect. The sum will be 1 less than what it should be. And that in a nutshell is counter control using while loop and sentinel control using while loop. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. I hope you find it valuable. Please make sure that you do the exercise which is up next. Alright, so here's the exercise. So very straightforward. We once again have those 3 variables as you can see from the presentation, and we have the printf counter control and printf sentinel control. And very simply, I want you to implement a counter controlled while loop that will run 20 times with a counter that starts at 0. Alright, and then in the sentinel controlled loop, once again use a while loop with a sentinel value of -2, which will then calculate and display the average of the user input. So basically, in the loop, the user keeps on entering a value until -2 was given, and then once -2 is given, then your program must go and calculate and display what was the average of all the inputs that were given to the user, to the program. Alright guys, that's it for this session. I hope you enjoyed it. See you next time.